and our most amazing consultant that I really will look up to when it comes to INSEAD's application. So we're going to talk everything INSEAD in today's session. I would invite all of you to go on your cameras. And as we go through the session, if questions come through to your minds, please feel free to raise your hands and unmute yourself. We want to make this session as interactive as possible. To begin with, I would really like to invite Pravek to introduce himself. And then thereon, probably we'll start with the questions that we've already received from some of our audience. And as we go through the session, please feel free to drop in your questions if you're not comfortable going on the camera. But please turn on your cameras, guys. Like, you're the next global business leaders. We hope to see your faces. Over to you, Pravek.
No, thanks, Bharati. Hi, everyone. So just a bit of an introduction. So I'm originally from India, from the pink city of Jaipur. I did my high school over there, and I moved to Hong Kong back in 2012 to pursue my undergrad from HKUST. Did my bachelor's in engineering, 4 years, and then I stayed on in Hong Kong, worked for another 4 years at a leading investment bank across their tech and talent functions. After spending 8 years outside of India and in Hong Kong, I decided that it's probably the best time for me to take that next big step and focus on an MBA, higher education. And back then I looked at INSEAD. It pretty much ticked all the boxes for me in terms of what I wanted in terms of my MBA goals, post-MBA goals, as well as what the school had, in essentially to offer. Being a European school, a 1-year MBA program, leading MBA, curriculums across the globe. So that said, I started my INSEAD MBA program in January 2021. So I was part of the 21D batch, as we call it. A 1-year program, I was part of the Jan intake, graduated in December 2021. And since then, I've been based here in London, working as an innovation consultant with Bain & Company. It's been almost 3 years.
Thanks, Pravek. Thanks for a wonderful introduction. Since you mentioned the D batch, and I was just hopping out of a profile evaluation call, probably we could start off with the D and the J terminology for INSEAD, just for a candid conversation beginner, and then I'll move on to the more serious questions. So yeah, do you want to maybe?
Yeah, sure, Parthi. So yeah, essentially in terms of terminology, every batch has a J batch and a D batch. So in my case, it was either 21J or 21D, which essentially means 21D are the students who will graduate in 2021 December. Essentially, they are the ones who are starting in January 2021 or 25 or 26 for that matter. And the J batch are the students who are graduating in July of the same year. Essentially, they're the ones who start September of the previous year. So that's how we kind of denote what batch or what intake are you part of, essentially.
Yeah, and I think like as we going through the session, we can already take up the next question, which came through to us. For career switchers, which intake do you recommend?
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I think great question. It is one of the most common questions that I get for all future MBA candidates looking at INSEAD as one of their target schools. So of course, there are 2 intakes, one starting in January, one starting in September. And the biggest difference, I would say, between these 2 intakes is the fact that in the January intake, you get an opportunity to go for a summer internship for 2 months over the course of summer. That is something that's missing from the September intake, and which is essentially the biggest difference. Academically speaking, the number of opportunities that you get, both the intakes are exactly the same. So specifically, if we look at people who want to switch careers, there is an inclination towards the Jan intake, primarily because of 3 reasons, right? Of course, the summer internship, which gives you an opportunity to have a hands-on experience in one of your target industries, which obviously you wouldn't get in the September intake. Second is, of course, in this new sector, you also get an opportunity to travel around Europe or Asia, wherever you are, and network with people, with alumni, as well as with professionals working in this new sector. And third is that through the summer internship, you actually get that platform to demonstrate very specific capabilities and potentially also secure a full-time job after the summer internship. So as an example, right, if you were to look at investment banking as a future career after the MBA, the Jan intake is definitely preferred because almost all of the investment banks out there, they only recruit from summer interns. So essentially, they will call you for a summer internship, and then on the basis of your performance and capabilities, they'll offer you a full-time role, which starts next year in January or February. So it really depends on what kind of professions you are targeting. Investment banking, as an example, is very specific. So yes, a January intake will be preferred for that. But apart from that, if you're switching careers, if you really want to try out new things, you want to try out, say, the startup world, consulting for that matter, then the January intake is definitely way more preferred because you get that platform, you get those 2 months, And I mean, for some of us, we just want to kind of spend those 2 months traveling around Europe. So if that's a priority, then of course the Jan intake would make more sense.
Yeah, thanks, Pravik, for that. I wanted to add that even if you don't want to you don't want to be career switching, just to take a little breather, because it's a really fast-paced program. It's 10 months. You won't even know where 10 months passed you by. So I would always prefer, and that's just my bias over there. And that doesn't mean that you should go for a Jan intake. You should do your own research. But I absolutely think that Jan intake makes more sense for such a short-term program. Then I see a bunch of questions that Kritika has just posted. We will cover some of these in the list of questions that we have, and then we'll go back to your questions, Kritika, to address some of them from there. So we've got another question, which is a follow-up of what we were talking about, Pravik. Is January intake better for entrepreneurs or candidates with non-traditional goals? I think you've kind of already touched upon it, but maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So, I mean, specifically for entrepreneurs, I've actually come across two different types of profiles, and one batch is essentially more, preferable for each of those profiles. So, the first one is that if you want to become an entrepreneur, if you want to start your startup after the MBA, and you kind of have a rough idea in your mind, but you really want to validate it further. You want to meet more people, you want to get that exposure. Maybe you want to test it out in the real world before really graduating from the MBA and, putting it into in the process. So if you're one of those, then yes, the January intake makes a lot more sense, because those 2 months that you'll get during the summer, you can really test that business idea out. You can validate in a real world setting, maybe in a different geography as well. Or you can also join a very early stage startup who is working on, which is working on a very similar solution in a different geography, perhaps, which will obviously give you more insights in terms of what exactly do you need to change. So based on that, of course, you can refine your business plans. You'll also get 2 extra months to network with your peers, network with professionals in a different geographical setting than your home country. So if you're that sort of a profile, then definitely the Jan intake makes more sense. The other sort of entrepreneurs I've seen are who enter the MBA with a very specific and already tested and validated startup idea. All they want from the MBA is access to the network, as well as just to gain that business acumen. They already know what exactly they want to do right after the MBA. So for them, it's more of race against time. So for them, of course, I would then suggest the September intake. You can get done with the MBA in 10 months, get that access to the network. If you want, of course, you can test and validate the idea, but you're back in the business within 10 months. So based on what your entrepreneurial goals are, it really depends on that in terms of what intake you should be targeting. More often than not, of course, you are in the former category, at least from my experience. So if you're an entrepreneur, I would suggest the Jan intake.
Thanks, Pravik. I hope that was insightful for everyone over here. I would want to just steer clear from the conversation we're having and talk about the hottest question that we always get for INSEAD, which is international exposure. And then we'll take up your question, Rishabh. So how does INSEAD evaluate international exposure in the application process? And probably, Pravik, we can also touch upon a lot of myths that people have around international exposure. So over to you for that.
Sure. Yep, thanks, Bharti. Again, one of the most kind of asked questions, I guess, for INSEAD, and not just for INSEAD, for pretty much MBA as a topic, right? So I think if I share from an admission committee's perspective, when they ask you about international exposure, they're essentially looking for applicants who can demonstrate two things. One is their global perspectives, and also their cross-cultural adaptability, essentially. Now, one of the biggest myth or misconceptions around international exposure is that, I can only demonstrate this if I have lived, worked, or studied outside of my home country. And if I can be honest, that is far from the truth. I mean, I have worked with so many candidates, successful candidates, who did not ever travel outside of their home country, but were still able to bag amazing offers from INSEAD, from multiple different MBA schools. And I think the point over here is that how exactly do you demonstrate this global perspective and this cross-cultural adaptability? Of course, it can be demonstrated through the fact if you've lived, studied, or worked in different countries. But it can also, I think more importantly, it can be demonstrated through the fact that if you've worked with international teams, even if you've been in your home country. So if I can structure it a little more, right? So what the admission committee looks for is two things. One is the breadth, and the second is the depth. So when I talk about breadth, which is essentially what is the breadth of your international experience? What are the different geographies that, say, you've lived and worked in? What kind of colleagues have you collaborated with? Where do these colleagues come from? What kind of cultures do these colleagues come from? Do you understand the different ways of working, etc. So essentially the breadth of your experience. And for each of those pillars across the entire breadth, the admission committee would ideally want to see what is the depth of your exposure. So beyond just a very superficial exposure, they want to see that, do you have a good understanding of cultural nuances from different parts of the world? Are you adaptable towards, working with people coming from very different and diverse backgrounds? Or, how do you navigate challenges essentially in multicultural settings? Because what INSEAD wants to see over here is that once you get into the school, you will be put in a batch where people are coming from 70 plus nationalities. So do you have the capabilities or the exposure to thrive in such an environment? Now, obviously, that doesn't necessarily come from, traveling outside of your home country. That can also come from if you've had experience working with Americans, Brits, Europeans, etc. over the course of your professional experience. So that's essentially what they really want to test out for. Plus, they also want to make sure that you're ready for the opportunities that you'll get after INSEAD, which again will expose you to so many different cultures, so many different people from multiple diverse backgrounds. So they want to check and really validate if you have the right exposure to be comfortable and to understand these different cultural nuances. So that's essentially how they evaluate international exposure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pravik. I would reiterate again, they just want to know how comfortable you are, not judging people coming from different parts of the world. And like Pravik said, they are going to make cohorts of 6 people each. People would be coming from very conflicting countries, and they really want to see how you navigate through the whole year together as a team. So if you can demonstrate that with whatever experience you've had, whether you stepped out of the country or not, it's irrelevant to INSEAD. So I hope that answers a lot of questions that you guys have always had. And I know that's one of the first questions that comes up to me when we're looking at INSEAD. So I hope we will publish this bit about international exposure on YouTube as well, so the world gets to know, and there are lesser myths, and we go ahead and apply to INSEAD more and more. All right, we'll tackle Rushab's question now. And this is more specific for somebody who's experienced INSEAD. So Pravik, I think your insight will count here. How do career services work at INSEAD? What are the target geographies for Indians?
Understood. Career services, right? If I got that correctly, Pariti?
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. Well, okay. Let's probably start this conversation by busting another myth over here. The entire topic around campus placements, as we call it. So it's a very I would say it's a concept that is very prevalent in Indian colleges and MBA colleges undergrad, where a lot of companies come on campus, you give your interviews, and then you essentially get placed. However, what everyone needs to understand is that how you look out for opportunities, how exactly these placements are done is very different outside of India, where career services and career centers of course operate within every school, but campus placement as such of how it happens in India doesn't really happen outside of India. So the access to opportunities that you will get as an INSEAD grad will exactly be the same as what an LBS grad will get or what an ESA grad will get. So essentially the access to opportunities remains exactly the same. Of course, your career center will be inviting all of these potential employers on campus for presentations, for networking. So yes, you will get a chance to directly have conversations with people, with partners, consultants, etc. of your target companies, and these will essentially be throughout the entire year. So there will not be a company that they would skip as such. In fact, you can even ask your career center to invite a very specific industry or a company that you would like to have a conversation with. So that definitely happens. So opportunities are given to you in order for you to kind of build those relations within those companies, directly network with people, with alumni who are already working in those companies, which again is super helpful when you go ahead and put in your application. What the Career Center or Career Services also help you is connect you with former alumni of your school of INSEAD if your ask is very specific. So again, from my experience, right, I wanted to talk very specifically to someone who has worked in innovation consulting, which is quite a niche area within consulting. And obviously that is not something that's very actively marketed on campus through presentations, etc. So my career coach was able to connect me with someone. I was able to have coffee chats and really, build my kind of standing within the company before I even put in my application, which is essentially the crux of networking, which is expected essentially out of every, MBA grad. So that's where the Career Center will be super helpful. Every INSEAD grad is allocated one-to-one with a career coach who really will be completely invested in your entire career trajectory, will help you meet your MBA post MBA goals, and will help you really connect with whoever you want to. So that is the benefit that the Career Center offers you. Very different from the entire campus placement approach that we follow in India, but again, not any less valuable, I would say.
Thanks, Pravik. So now that we're talking about the career switching, career services, etc., and everything that you talked about, networking, why do candidates pay so much of money to INSEAD or any top business school for that matter? Is the big network that you get. I'm very curious in understanding that all the candidates, of course, that you've worked with, I've read some of their applications, but about your application, you made a big switch in your career as well, like coming from tech, going into Bain management consulting, which is like the classic dream for most candidates going to INSEAD. Did you really talk about that as your post MBA goal in your application? And I was just curious, like, how did you navigate the whole journey and landed at Bain yourself? So maybe if you could share a little bit about your own personal journey, I feel like all of us will get to learn a lot from that. Yeah.
Sure, sounds good. Of course, happy to share that, Parthi. So, starting with just a bit of context, right? So, back in Hong Kong, after I graduated with computer science as my bachelor's, I started working with JP Morgan Chase, the investment bank. I started out in their network space, tech space, extremely siloed. 2 years into it, I essentially thought that, okay, this is getting very siloed for me. I don't really understand how the bank works. I want to explore more. That's when I made the move from tech to human resources, which is essentially the talent function. I was a training coordinator and an organizer for another 2 years. I think apart from, of course, what the role and responsibility asked from me, my biggest achievement back then was the fact that I was able to bring my tech expertise and knowledge and apply it to a completely new function, human resources, and typically a function that has stayed extremely far away from digital transformation of all kinds. So over those next 2 years, of course, apart from handling my daily roles and responsibilities, I was also able to put into place a lot of digital tools and digital applications for human resources within the bank in Hong Kong. And that was, I think, the biggest kind of, light bulb moment for me, that I want to stay in tech, but I want to stay more on the business side of tech, not really coding myself, but really looking at problems and looking at how can I digitally transform those problems. That was the moment when I realized that, yes, I think I need that business acumen to understand business more, to understand what are the industries, what are the different sectors that exist out there. Maybe not financial services, but yes, I do want to stay in this entire digital consulting or digital transformation domain. That's essentially when I applied to INSEAD, and yeah, very transparently sharing what my short-term and long-term goals back then were that I shared in the application. So what I said was that after the MBA, I would ideally want to join one of the leading digital consulting firms. For example, Accenture is definitely one that comes right at the top. That was my short-term goal, that I want to work with a lot of different industries and sectors, helping, looking at their problems and then helping them digitally find digital solutions essentially, or helping them digitally transform. That was my short-term goal. And why I wanted to do this was basically because I wanted to achieve my long-term career objective of making sure that, there are a lot of small companies, MSMEs, as we call it out there in India and beyond. Now, they have massive use cases for digital applications, but they don't have access to it because of limited resources, limited funding, etc. So my long-term career ambition essentially, and it still is, to be honest, is to kind of, just have this access or forward this access of disruptive technologies of AI, generative AI, etc., to these smaller companies, despite their lack of financial resources or, direct access to these disruptive technologies. And that I would get only through this exposure of being in the consulting world. So that was essentially what my application was framed around. When I obviously went through the MBA journey, what I understood was that apart from digital consulting is, of course, a very broad domain. Within that are a lot of smaller domains like innovation consulting, digital marketing, advanced analytics, etc. That's when I learned more about what innovation consulting is all about, which is essentially using digital tools to build new businesses for existing businesses. Again, extremely niche, but I could in a very I could really resonate with this particular domain. And that's essentially when I decided that yes, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to focus on. And that's when, through networking, I came across Bain & Company and their specific practice area of innovation consulting. So again, it definitely was a super long journey. I tried to be very brief about it. So hopefully that gives you a gist of the last 12 years of my life.
Thanks a lot, Pravik. That was really insightful. And I'm sure all of us got to learn a lot and how we can implement, how you navigated your application. We can all use learnings from that and put it together. if we are applying to Jan 26 intake or even round 3, if some of us are going for that right now. With whatever you've just advised all of us on, I can see one of the questions that Kritika had asked earlier. She's asking, can we change majors as opposed to what we spoke about in the application when we submitted it? So, yeah, I
Okay.
mean, quick. So, I mean, it could be genuine. Nobody's
Yeah.
investigating so much, but it's a genuine question. So, yeah, over to
Fair
you
enough.
for that.
Now,
Yeah.
again, one of the questions that I get asked quite a lot. So I would say, there are two things over here. One is the narrative that we write in your application, the one that should sound extremely compelling to the admission committee. That yes, it's a very smooth trajectory based on where you're coming from. Why do you need the MBA? Why do you need it now? How does it relate to your short-term goal? And how does the short-term goal act as a stepping stone to eventually achieve your long-term career objective? So this entire narrative is just one part of the entire journey. That is what you write in your application. That is what gets you the offer. The second thing is more realistic in nature. Once you start your MBA, once you get that exposure, once you get that network, you start talking to a lot of people, you start talking to a lot of alumni, you understand that, okay, apart from what you already knew about existing industries, existing sectors, functions, etc., there is a lot out there as well. And more often than not, what happens is that you understand that, yes, this might be something which is more relevant to my career trajectory as compared to what I wrote in my application. Again, no one's going to come and check that this is what you wrote, this is what you're doing, that's not aligned. No one's going to come and check. But essentially, what the admission committee wants to check when they ask you for your entire narrative is that you should be clear on your goals. They're essentially looking for a degree of clarity that an applicant must have about their entire career, or just a kind of a vision that they should have in their mind before they start their MBA journey. They want to see that, okay, is there an opportunity, is there a market gap that they've already identified that they want to work towards as part of their longer term career ambition? And if yes, then of course you'll be through. And once you enter the MBA program, you can change your majors, you can choose your electives, you can do whatever you want. You'll get ample opportunities and resources to really think out very loud and be extremely innovative about the different sectors and industries that exist. I mean, during my MBA, I found out one of my batchmates came from the fragrance industry. She was a fragrance expert. I didn't even know that existed. So that happened with a lot of people. I mean, they were exposed to professions that they didn't even know existed, and they felt super aligned with, and they were successfully able to make this career move.
Thanks, Praveen. There's another question that I get asked a lot just around this. Like, of course, people have apprehensions. Are they going to read our application and also going to validate whether we're pursuing exactly what we said or not? Let's say I want to say change my post MBA goal, or let's say I'm going for MBBs. Are they going to look at my GMAT or GRE score? Is that going to really put me in a position that, I am less competitive than somebody who had a 745 if I'm just a 645? But yeah, do you want to share your thoughts? Because that gets like that comes to us a lot as well. So.
Yeah, so okay, two aspects to it, right? One is there are a lot of questions that I receive that will future employers look at my GMAT scores or my MBA application? And second is, will these future employers look at my GPA, not just undergrad, but also your MBA GPA? So answering the first one depends on the company. To be honest, if we look at the MBBs, if we look at say 10 years back, they used to very actively look at your GMAT scores, not your MBA application. No one looks at your essays. Once you have the offer, no one's going to look at them. But yes, they used to look at the GMAT scores 10 years back. Now this trend has been changing a lot because these companies have obviously understood that, okay, GMAT is not everything. They look at your profile very holistically. There are a lot of interviews that are conducted. Currently, if I can share very transparently, McKinsey is the only company that still actively looks at GMAT scores. So that is probably something that you should keep in mind while you're putting in your applications. But if you look at the MBBs, Bain and BCG do not look at GMAT scores anymore. And answering the second part of this, the GPA. So INSEAD specifically has a policy around non-disclosure for their GPA. So any employer, anywhere you apply, the employers do not have the right to get access to your transcripts or to your GPA. So whatever be the grades, you just need to pass. And that is enough for you to get the job, get your dream job, and go through the interview process.
Thanks, Praveen. I think we've never touched upon this question, but thanks for the insight that you've given today. And I'm going to, I didn't know the McKinsey Bain BCG bit, like how it's different, but interesting to know. I thought INSEAD also had a non-disclosure on the GMAT or GRE, but I didn't know that the employers could directly like ask for it if they want to see it. Interesting to know that.
Yeah. I think because NCR doesn't really have direct control over your GMAT score.
Yeah.
GPA, which is of course internal. But
Yeah.
McKinsey is kind of infamous for asking this question in their form.
Yep. Interesting. Okay. All right. So I see a lot of questions around the years of experience. So somebody's asking how INSEAD sees somebody with 8+ years of experience. Somebody's asking 7+. And I see another one with 13+ years of experience. How would you address this question? Like, I think people are just for this broad range of a spectrum that I see right now with the years of experience.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think so. Definitely, there's a spectrum of the number of years of experience that they typically look out for, with obviously an average being around 5 or 6 years, if I remember correctly. Now, I have seen outliers. I have seen people who have been able to get into the INSEAD MBA program even with 2 years of experience, and I've seen people get into the MBA program with 15 years of work experience. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, what really matters is how you're able to position your entire narrative. With 2 years of work experience, if you're able to demonstrate each and every value that the AdCom is really looking out for, diversity, inclusion, international experience, extracurriculars, having really compelling professional achievements and failures, etc. If you're able to demonstrate that, and if you're also able to tell them that, yes, even though I have 2 years worth of work experience, this is the right time for me to go for an MBA, and justify that through evidence, etc. in your application, of course, the admission committee will be happy with that. And same is the case with 15 years of work experience as well. I mean, I was working with this candidate very recently with 14, 15 years of work experience. And because of a lot of personal reasons, she actually had to leave the workspace during these 15 years, because of which on paper it is 15 years, but essentially it's more of 7 to 8 years. Now, at the end of the day, it all came down to how exactly are we able to justify this? How are we able to justify, say, the gap as well? And really bring out the best of our entire application in this narrative. So it really depends on how well you're able to position the entire narrative, the career trajectory, what are your goals, and how well does the MBA kind of fit into the picture, as well as really being able to justify why this is the best time for you to go for an MBA. Of course, I know this conversation is around INSEAD, but probably worth calling out that there are few very specialized, specific MBA programs out there for people who have 10 plus 12 plus years of experience. For example, the IMD business school in Switzerland is a great school for people with a lot of years of work ex. And plus, on top of that, there's that entire conversation of, is an executive MBA a better option? Maybe if you can work for another 2 or 3 years and then maybe join the executive MBA instead of going for the MBA program. But again, it's a it's a function of what your goals are, what you really want to achieve out of the MBA, and why do you think right now is the best time for you to go for an MBA.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pravik. So I think we all work so hard to figure out an answer for why MBA, but it's all like, for the years of experience, it's going to be why MBA now. As long as you have a very strong answer for yourself, that you're able to convince yourself with it, I feel you'll be able to convince the business school as well. Sometimes I see candidates, they try to really push MBA in their journey, and then they start thinking about, okay, which school, why, whatever. So I always advise candidates, it's a very expensive degree that you're going for. Only go for it when you feel it's the right time for you. And there are, of course, various ways how you can figure that out. There could be multiple reasons why you want to go for an MBA. Dig into those. If you don't have the reasons justifiable enough, don't put that money into an MBA, guys. Like, life can be figured out without an MBA as well. Like, I had 2 conversations just this morning. An entrepreneur has really been, like, he's really been able to scale his business pretty well, and he's going for Series B funding right now, just because he's running out of time, which is basically he has 8 years of experience right now. He feels he's always wanted to get an MBA, and he doesn't know why. It's just for credibility and, of course, competition and all of that. But he's been able to achieve everything he wants to achieve in his career, in his life, personal life goals and everything. So then I just asked him and he has a score as well, 715. So, but he's still confused whether he should go for an MBA or not. So get to that point where MBA is a necessity. Don't try to fit it in. As long as you have that answer, whether it's 13 years of experience or 4.5, I think business schools are going to be fine. So that's how I'll put it. Okay, let me choose a question right now. There's so many to tackle. We can tackle something around finances, actually, because a lot of people worry about that. INSEAD MBA is an expensive investment. How did you finance your MBA? I think, Pravik, the question directly comes to you. Did you look at considerations like ROI slash payback period, etc.? So yeah, any advice or insight on that would work.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I personally financed it through Prodigy Finance, which is essentially one of the leading financial aid companies. They do offer 100% tuition fees coverage for the leading business schools across the globe. So that's definitely one option that you could look at. The biggest advantage is that they don't really ask for any collateral. All they ask from you is a confirmed offer from one of the leading business schools, and they're ready to finance your tuition fees 100%. Of course, the interest rates are a tad bit higher as compared to the market rates, but I think that's what you get for no collateral and a very straightforward and easy financing solution for your MBA programs. I think a couple of factors, right? When I was looking at finding the right school for me, given the financial constraints, given all the different requirements that I had, the reason why I chose INSEAD first was definitely the fact that it's a 1-year MBA program versus a 2-year one. Of course, 2-year MBA programs, say in the US, are a tad bit more expensive as well. Plus, there is that entire opportunity cost of an entire year of not getting your salary. So if I were to kind of factor that in as well, the 2-year MBA program was not making a lot of sense for me, which is why I went for only one-year programs. And second was more from an immigration perspective, right? So if you're spending, say, 100,000 euros, 110,000 euros on an MBA program, you would obviously want to work in an economy where you're able to get a higher salary, higher than the average salary, say, for example, that you would be able to get in India. So from an immigration perspective, I wasn't very keen on the US because I personally didn't want to be part of that, random lottery immigration system, being asked to go back home at any point of time. Personally, wasn't very comfortable with that, which is why I chose Europe, because in the UK, London was my target geography. Because again, here in the UK, if you graduate from a UK school, of course, you get 2 years worth of work visa, plus there is a guaranteed 5-year sponsorship track to permanent residency and eventually to your nationality. And same is the case for a lot of European countries as well. So that said, even from an immigration perspective, I personally felt way more comfortable that yes, if I am able to bag a job in this economy, in this geography, then yes, I will be able to make it through the entire 5-year mark, get the permanent residency, get the passport, as well as be able to pay off my financial loan completely. And just in terms of ROI, right, I know that is also a question that is usually asked. So if I can take my own personal example, I graduated December 21 and we're sitting in December 24, and I am pretty much done paying off 99% of the Prodigy loan that I had taken. So typically 3 to 4 years is the time frame that candidates should keep in mind for completely paying off their tuition fees 100%.
Thanks, Pravik. Sometimes I feel we talk about Prodigy Finance so much, I should better off partner with them because
100%.
like everybody's gone for Prodigy, and they've been super kind to some of the candidates. That during COVID who lost their jobs, they were very willing to put their in, like, really pause any of the payback or anything for more than 8 to 9 months for some of the stories that I know. So they've been
100%.
like very supportive in that, and with no interest rates calculated extra during that period. So that was super helpful. Even though, like you said, the interest rates are slightly higher than the others, but I think the other aspects of getting the support from them is next level. All right, thanks for that. Another question Mayank is asking: how are the prospects of getting product roles? Because I know INSEAD is much more known for management consulting, strategy consulting as a consulting school. But this is a genuine question that comes through to us. How often do candidates land themselves into product management roles after INSEAD? So do you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No. I think firstly, yes, INSEAD, yes, these schools are more known around being feeder schools for management consulting, strategy consulting, etc. Less so for, say, financial services based roles or product management roles. But I would say this is a trend that I'm seeing, which is shifting very rapidly over the last couple of years. Primarily because consulting as an industry is also shaping in a very different way. And again, this has consequences over the next 5 years as well, where consulting is now, management consulting, strategy consulting is moving more towards implementation and delivery based roles. And within these roles, product managers are highly required. So if I look at the hiring stats from management consulting companies today, even these companies who were never hiring for product managers are now actively looking for product managers. So, I mean, to be completely transparent, if I can say, if anything, the trend is actually moving more towards hiring more product managers rather than consultants from the same exact schools that we're talking about over here. So I don't think I wouldn't worry a lot about product management roles not being there. Essentially, if anything, over the next 2-3 years, product management roles will definitely take over even consulting roles. To be honest, yeah.
Thanks, Praveg. I mean, I've seen a lot of people graduating from INSEAD. Of course, the percentage is much lesser, landing themselves in Netflix, Spotify, and now even entertainment. Deezer is one of the this which is competitor of Spotify that goes to INSEAD for hiring for their product management roles. And you can already, like, if you LinkedIn people, you'll see so many INSEADers over there, even at Spotify. So of course the percentage is lesser because people also go there, and Big Fours and MBBs, they go to INSEAD to recruit for management consulting roles. But yes, I would still consider, because for anybody who's gone and become a product manager post INSEAD, they talk about the curriculum very differently compared to how, when the ones who went into MBBs, they were doing cases, while it has a lot of customization with respect to how you make it fit to product management as your post MBA goal as well. So look up the curriculum, see how can you really customize it for your post MBA goals, and I think that's the beauty of INSEAD MBA as well. You should be able to fit it into your journey. Okay, now I know we will not be able to touch upon all the questions, so I'm already putting a disclaimer. I'm trying to touch as many as possible, but if there's some still left, happy to go on a call with you later, or please feel free to send us an email and we'll reply to your questions. David is asking, now this is a language question, and he's asking again, how does learning another language help for INSEAD? I have a B2 in Portuguese. Would increasing my proficiency help? So Praveg, yeah, since INSEAD, HEC, these schools, they really care about a third language. How do you advise candidates to navigate through this?
Yeah, fair enough. So I think firstly, if I talk about the INSEAD language requirement, they essentially want you to know at least 3 languages by the time of graduation. One is, of course, your native language. One is your entry language, and entry language more often than not is English. And one is your exit language. So in a lot of situations, the native language and entry language are not a barrier as such. It's the exit language that a lot of people have a lot of questions around. So INSEAD as a school, they do offer classes and curriculums on pretty much a lot of European languages and even non-European languages for you to be able to make that your exit language. And the requirement for INSEAD is, I think, not more than an A2 level for a language to be your exit language. So in your case, David, I think you mentioned that Portuguese B2. I think that's good enough for INSEAD. In fact, before you start your journey with INSEAD, every student gets an opportunity to give an exam, to take an exam on their exit language before even starting their MBA curriculum. And if they're able to demonstrate that they're already more than an A2 level or even an A2 level in a specific language, they don't really need to study that language throughout their MBA curriculum. So I know a lot of people who already knew 3+ languages, so they were very easily able to navigate through this requirement. And for other people who wanted to actually learn a language, or for people who did not know more than 2 languages, INSEAD had the right resources for you to be able to get an A2 in French, for that matter, for example, before you graduate. So, and again, this comes from a very INSEAD specific requirement that yes, they want people to be extremely diverse when it comes to understanding different languages, understanding different cultural nuances. And even the way they teach a language, it's less so about the grammar, but it's more so about understanding the very specific cultural nuances about a particular culture or a particular language. So if you say you want to learn French as your exit language, they will of course teach you about the grammar, about the language, but on top of that, they will also teach you about the French culture, because that's essentially what they want to instill in you as an MBA grad.
Thanks, Praveg. So a lot of times I've seen candidates, struggle a lot when they're studying the language alongside the program, and then of course they have to give advice to the successors that try to do the language before you join the program, because it's really fast paced, like we said, and you do have to put in some time in to get that kind of that certification or whatever, and you really don't want to utilize that time into learning a language during that time. So as soon as you get an admit letter, you probably want to spend a month or two just doing a certification of the language of your choice. That's how I would advise you to navigate through this, so that you can really free up that extra hour, in a few weeks, or 2 hours every week for whatever, when the exams are coming, to socialize. Because I learned one thing from all my INSEAD fellas, that there are three S's: socialize, sleep, and study. And you can only choose two at one point in time. So you either socialize and sleep, or you sleep and study and you don't socialize. So you will always have to prioritize two out of these three. Sometimes you really have to give up on sleep if you want to socialize a lot, and you have to study. So you make your pick over there. Don't let language come in your way. Already get it done with before you join INSEAD. That's
And
my
to that point, Paridhi, now even INSEAD gives you that opportunity to come to Fontainebleau or to Singapore 2 months before the curriculum starts and focus those 2 months only on the language. So they offer you specifically those language classes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I just heard like, yeah, everybody's already left, even though they're
Yeah.
starting in January. That's quite interesting. Okay, so we've got, I think there are a couple of questions, two questions I saw around campuses. Do you want to talk about how does the campus selection and what are the different campuses that, people can opt for, Praveg, a little bit?
Yeah, sounds good. Again, a very classic INSEAD question. So, firstly, just to be again completely transparent, there is absolutely no difference academically or in terms of opportunities that you'll get post MBA or even during the MBA between the Fontainebleau campus in France or the Singapore campus. It's exactly the same. Of course, different faculty operates in different geographies, but the courses that you'll get, the opportunities that you'll get in terms of jobs or internships is exactly the same regardless of where you're located. It's pretty much just offered to you in just to kind of expand your geographical exposure. If you want to stay in Singapore, network with professionals who are in Singapore, you would want to choose to start in Singapore. Or on the other hand, if you want to say network with people in Paris, Amsterdam, in London, then of course you would want to start with the Fontainebleau campus. But even during the entire INSEAD curriculum, you will get the opportunity to move between campuses. So the first two periods, so we call them periods. INSEAD is essentially, the entire year consists of 5 different periods. The first 2 periods you have to be in your home campus, which is either Fontainebleau or Singapore. But the third, fourth, and fifth period, you can actually choose to travel around. You can choose to go to the Singapore campus, spend maybe a period over there, 2 periods over there, come back to Fontainebleau if you want for recruitment. Plus, on top of Singapore and Fontainebleau, there's also exchange opportunities. So I spent 1 period in Kellogg in Chicago in the US. Apart from Kellogg, you can also go to Siebes in China. You can also go to Wharton in the US and spend 1 period over there on exchange as well. So you do get this opportunity to really, fly around, get exposed to different geographies across North America, APAC, as well as Europe. But in terms of opportunities, even if you're in Singapore, you can still apply to London-based opportunities and be considered pretty much an equal to, say, a Fontainebleau-based applicant.
Thanks, Praveg. I think there were a few questions around access to various geographies for jobs after INSEAD, because somebody's just asking like how often do people get opportunities in the US, and then earlier I saw two questions around what access do we have to geographies as Indians. So do you want to maybe shed some light on that? Yeah.
Right. So, okay, firstly, I think in terms of access to opportunities, it depends, of course, on the nationality. So if, say, you're already an American passport holder, obviously that will increase your chances of being able to bag a job in the US. But typically removing this as a factor, if I look at, say, Indian passport holders, then I think the biggest kind of geography that is targeted is either London or Singapore, primarily because of the proximity to Fontainebleau and, of course, to Singapore, as well as a lot of opportunities in general exist in these markets, right? Plus, employers are more often than not willing to sponsor visas for INSEAD grads, whether it be London or Singapore. But I have been seeing a lot of changing trends where now, apart from London and Singapore, even Middle East is coming up as super hotspot for INSEAD grads. I know a lot of people who have directly gone to Dubai or Riyadh or Doha and started their consulting careers or even product management careers over there. A lot of my batchmates have started working in London or Singapore and then eventually after a year or two moved to the Middle East. So definitely Middle East is popping up as one of those hotspots for employment opportunities after INSEAD. But within Europe, I would say London definitely comes up right at the top, but followed by London is Berlin, Amsterdam, and Brussels as the top spots for English-speaking opportunities. Of course, Paris, Barcelona, Madrid, Zurich, these are super language-focused and language-specific cities and countries. So yeah, to be transparent, it might be a little tricky for Indians, for example, to find jobs in these cities as compared to London, Berlin, Brussels, and Amsterdam, where most of the opportunities are English-speaking or pretty much language agnostic.
Thanks, Pravik. I see, like you said, a lot of people choosing to move to Middle East right now, actually, even though they've either lived in London or even in Singapore. Singapore is fine because, of course, the taxes aren't that
Yeah.
high. But I see a lot of people moving after living in London also to Middle East just to, save up on the taxes for a little bit and then go back somewhere. So just to help everybody understand that you can also switch geographies after you've landed yourself a job post INSEAD because the network is fairly global and you do get opportunities to switch geographies even after, let's say, 2 3 years of living in a certain country. So that's there. Let me pick, just I think we'll only be able to tackle 2 to 3 more questions. Praveg, if you're seeing the questions, do you have a preference or should I go pick it?
I don't have the chat window open in front of
Okay,
me.
okay, no worries, no worries. I'll go through this. Okay, I had a question around the GRE versus GMAT, another classic that we get. Is there a preference for the latter during the admission cycle, especially with regards to scholarship?
Yeah, I mean, to be very brief about this, no, there is no preference. GMAT or GRE, it's exactly the same value. It's just that you would ideally want to be in that spectrum of what they define as a good score. And until that happens, I think it's pretty good. People do have their preferences around whether they want to go for GRE or GMAT. I think GMAT has more of a quant focus, whereas GRE has more of a verbal focus. So depending on your personal preferences, you can choose either of those. It absolutely has no difference when it comes to scholarship applications or even for the admission committee in general.
Thanks, Praveg. I'm going to take this one up. NJ wants to know, I have a question around international exposure. I currently work with Bain Capability Network, back office of Bain, and have been working with American case teams for 2 years, helping majorly on private equity due diligence. Can this setup help me create a strong point around international exposure?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know BCN very well, and a lot of people within BCN are on a pretty much on a daily basis interacting with clients and even with colleagues who are based in the London office, in the Boston and New York office within Bain as well. So definitely, I mean, it is a great starting point for in order to demonstrate your international exposure. You can very well say that yes, you have been collaborating with colleagues across the globe within Bain. You have been collaborating with clients across the globe, and as you said, right, a lot of private equity clients are actually based in the US. So definitely, you can showcase and demonstrate that yes, you have that cultural sensitivity around understanding different ways of working, around understanding different financial considerations within the private equity space when it comes from, say, the UK or from the US, despite you being based here in India. So 100%, I think I've worked with a lot of MBA candidates who come from BCN within Bain, and it definitely is a great platform for you to be able to demonstrate these skills.
All right, thanks, Pravik. A lot of 3 questions I see around low GPA. So do you have advice on how can candidates navigate through a very low GPA? Are there any tactics, any ways, except for improving their GMAT scores, or is that the only way? So over to you for that, Pravik. Yeah.
Right. I think, yeah, so I would actually take this question a little broad, right? How do you navigate kind of negative data points on your application, right? So for some, this negative data point can be their lower GPA. For some, it actually can be a very long career gap or a career break in their application. So anything that immediately tells you it's something negative on your career trajectory, and how do you kind of navigate that? So I think one of the most important aspects, firstly, is to acknowledge this negative factor, or this factor, I would say, in your application, and being completely honest about it. So the admission committee definitely values honesty and self-awareness in general in your essays and in your application. They value this a lot. So step one about a low GPA or a career gap is really acknowledging it firstly, and framing that entire piece in a very positive manner. So for example, if it's a career gap, then if you're able to demonstrate what exactly did you do during that career gap, that demonstrates growth, what were the different skills that you build, how are those skills transferable, etc. So you're kind of putting it in a positive light. And when it comes to a lower GPA, again, being able to demonstrate what were the reasons behind the low GPA. Maybe it was a lack of motivation because you weren't super aligned with those courses, you weren't super aligned with that specific major, and that can be justified, for example, by saying that even though I had, say, a computer science major, for the next 4 years, I was, busy working as an entrepreneur, building businesses, which is completely different from computer science. So that way, I am essentially justifying that yes, even though my GPA was super low, but I didn't let that impact my career trajectory. I didn't let that affect what I would work on in the future. I am still building new businesses. I am still being successful in a completely different domain. And because that domain didn't really align with my expectations back then, which is that's essentially the reason why I wasn't super motivated, etc. And that explains the lower GPA. So again, it really depends on how honestly do you acknowledge this negative factor on your profile, and how do you frame it, and how do you justify that, despite that happening, it didn't negatively impact my entire career trajectory, and I was still able to build skills out of it. I was still able to highlight a lot of transferable skills that will be valuable to me during the MBA and after the MBA as well. And yeah, in a similar manner, if you can just connect all of these dots, it will definitely make for a very compelling application for the admissions committee. Sorry, Parthi, are you there? Hi, Anjana, can you hear me, or is
Sorry, Praveen, it was my network.
okay,
Sorry,
okay.
guys.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, it wasn't my network. We were switching networks right now. All right, sorry. I kind of heard that you've addressed the last question that we were talking about low
Yes.
GPA. Anything negative? Let's take up maybe, yes. So this is a question we get a lot again. If we don't have big names on our resume, how does INSEAD see it? Like, for example, I'm working with a small startup right now in a smallish role. For a small team, like 20 people, 10 people, whatever. How is that perceived in INSEAD compared to, let's say, I'm working with Bain? So,
Understood. No, great question for sure. So I think names, they don't, names just by themselves, just brand names by themselves don't really carry a lot of value as such. It really depends on what value were you able to bring to that brand during your time with that company. So if it's a small startup or versus if it's a large company, if you're able to demonstrate, the different values that INSEAD values a lot, essentially communication skills, international exposure, cultural sensitivity, etc. All of these list of skills that INSEAD really values a lot. If you're able to demonstrate that, and if you're able to kind of connect all the dots between your current background, why the MBA, why now, your short-term goal and the long-term goal, then it really does not matter how big that name is. If you're able to, I mean, if you have a big name such as Bain or any big company on your resume, and you're still unable to demonstrate any value as such, it will essentially not carry a lot of weight on your application. So it really depends on what are the skills you're able to demonstrate and what kind of impact were you able to bring to the table of that company, of that brand, which will really help you in your MBA application.
yeah, thanks, Pravik. So, yeah, whether it's INSEAD or any other school, as long as you have a reason for why you're doing what you're doing, I think you're pretty sorted. So just have a strong reason for why you're doing what you're doing, and it'll really bring out the authenticity in your application. And that's what, if you've seen INSEAD's questions, they really go very deep into a candidate's profile, and there is a reason why they do that, and there's a reason why you see somebody with a 630 GMAT on a classic edition can make it through to INSEAD, somebody with a very poor GPA, somebody with 3 years of gap, somebody who's a yoga teacher and all of that, they all can make it to INSEAD because they really want to see what's your story. So go give it all. Like 8 essays really give you a lot of space to talk about yourself, and you can really make up for a lot of things. So I'm not sure how many of you are really looking at January 26 intake right now of all the audience that we have. But the best advice I can give you right now, the more time you spend on INSEAD's application, the better are your chances, irrespective of whatever is your scoring situation right now. So if you're looking at January 26, which is March 11 deadline, be mindful. INSEAD since last year has opened rolling admissions. So the sooner you are prepared, you should be ready to submit. Click on the submit button, the better are your chances. So I'll really leave it to you for that. So if you're preparing for your GMAT or GRE, you should be working on your application alongside. You should be doing it yourself. I'm not saying that you should be working with the consultant right now unless you have a score. But yeah, get into the research, attend the webinars, talk to the alums, talk to the students, become a part of various communities that you can, and take it ahead from there. Pravik, I feel you should go and drink some water because today between you and I, you were really talking a lot. So thanks a lot for being a great speaker tonight with me. And thanks everyone for being a lovely audience. Amazing to see like we had more than 90 people at one point in time joining, and 67 of you really stayed till the end. Thanks a lot, everyone, and hope to work with some of you and get you into INSEAD this season. All the best. And yes, Pravik is happy to take you on board if you're looking to. So take care.
Thanks,
All
Parthi.
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.